Hello and welcome back to my podcast called Faith is Strength. I'm Nochi Mendel. I'm speaking out of Suffolk, New York, helping spread the beautiful light of spiritual living across the world. May my words and the expressions of my soul be gratifying to everyone who hears them. I pray that my ideas help pave a beautiful path in your journey of life. Thank you for tuning in. The date of today's recording is March 8th of 2019. The topic being anxiety. I had the privilege to sit with my sister Gneshe, and we had a nice long dialogue. I brought up some great points which hopefully will help you and your journey in dealing with anxiety, fears, and struggles within that category. Thank you. All right, what's poppin'?
It's poppin', yo-yo.
I'm so excited for this topic. I can't even tell you.
First of all, start out by just telling me.
A couple years ago, I recorded some videos that I put onto YouTube about anxiety. I didn't like how it came across, so I took them down. I mean, that right there is anxiety.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It is, by the way. You know how many times I'll post something and I'll be like, does anyone even get what I'm saying?
No, I could help people. I've been dealing with anxiety for so many years. Let me make a video and put it up. And some people liked it and some people watched it and
didn't say anything.
No, and I was just like, no. This is not good enough.
That's
that OCD factor.
What did you feel? What about it did you feel like wasn't good? It was too scripted.
I don't know.
Too structured.
Funny, but I'm so passionate about this topic because I've been dealing with anxiety since I'm about 15 years old, and the reason I'm able to talk about it is because I've been dealing with it constantly up until this point. I'm 26 now, 11, 12 years, whatever it is.
Right.
I've been dealing with it actively, working it, not just like hiding from it. So there's accumulation of tricks and things that I've figured out along the way that have helped me get to where I am. I've overcome a lot of my anxiety, and there's so many different types of anxiety, but I've overcome some of them. And just knowing these little tricks, if anybody were able to tell me some of these tricks, it would have greatly helped me. Now, our background in anxiety is funny because almost everyone in our family has anxiety.
Yeah.
Anxiety runs in DNA. Science knows this for a fact. It's not just like, well, you have anxiety. That could happen,
right?
But more likely, it's passed down.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes to what is anxiety. So I've done research years ago, and it's years ago. I mean, within the past 5 years, and it's possible that they've had some breakthroughs or more discoveries. But the bottom line on anxiety is this, from my understanding, and of course I can't use all the fancy terminology for it, but there's a very basic, fundamental understanding of what's happening. From an evolutionary standpoint, we have evolved with a fight or flight mechanism. That's actually a good thing.
Right.
It's there to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
If we get into a fight or a sticky situation, you have to have the wherewithal to fight or run.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a mechanism that triggers certain things in our bodies. Our heart rate goes up, amongst other things. And we feel it when we're anxious. So there's a direct correlation between fight or flight and anxiety. Essentially what's happening when you get anxiety out of the blue or for seemingly meaningless things, your body is interpreting your situation or surroundings or your thoughts as a fight or flight situation.
Right, exactly.
It's understood from a certain perspective as a flaw in our evolution. Now, of course, if you have faith in Hashem and the way that He designed this world and our life, there may be deeper, more underlying purposes for example, to get us to change our life and habits, which I've found to be the case for me. But if we leave that aside, just from a very technical standpoint, it's a fluke. Our body is misinterpreting our surroundings, our situation. It's interpreting it as something that's fight or flight, there's some kind of danger. And the fear kicks in. Because there really isn't any danger, we start acting stupid and crazy. Because where are you running to and what are you running from?
Right.
So that's what anxiety essentially is. It's just this weird fluke that our bodies are reacting to in the wrong way. And if we're able to figure out why it's happening, those triggers, or that nothing is happening, or what's happening when it's happening, we're able to learn to kind of find ways to deal with it and possibly even mitigate it.
Mm-hmm.
So for my research, that's basically what I found. I mean, anxiety is just this, our body's misinterpreting a situation for something else. We freak out for no good reason. We think we have to fight or run.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we do. Like if we have bad anxiety, which we're going to get into on so many aspects of our life, we run from it, we hide from it, we build walls around it, and stuff like that. And which leads to a very crippling life. Anyone who has anxiety knows. I mean, anxiety is like the mother lode of destruction in our generation and possibly all generations in the past.
Right, because it holds people back.
It consumes you. It stops. It's a potential stopper.
Well, it's also so uncomfortable that if you already know that it's going to come on, you're already either holding back or not going to do certain things because of the fear of the uncomfortableness of it. And it's all subconscious.
Yeah.
But you may hold yourself back from certain situations or people or things because you already subconsciously wired and you know that you're going to have an anxious reaction.
Yeah.
And it's so uncomfortable that you don't even want to get into it to begin with.
In that sense, and in so many, it cripples you beyond imagination. People who would otherwise have so much potential in so many different areas.
Right. Right.
It just keeps them locked in a prison.
Absolutely.
So it's immensely crippling to millions and millions of people walking planet Earth today and throughout history. Anxiety is not new. So it's literally the flagship of personal issue.
Yeah. But I do want to say one thing about that. You're saying that it's fight or flight, which is true. Your brain is reacting to a supposed danger. But a lot of times that happens because of something we had experienced. So if your brain is experiencing whatever it is, whatever the trigger is, if it's the weather, if it's a certain situation, if it's the way somebody's handling something or dealing with you, or a smell, or whatever it is, for everyone it's different. And when that supposed danger happened in the past, or maybe it was a danger, or maybe it was a traumatic experience, when you get that trigger now, it could cause an anxiety attack because your brain is actually preparing you for what it had already experienced.
That's true too. I mean, it's what's the word for it? You kind of memorize. You're programming yourself through traumas and other awkward or uncomfortable situations to trigger yourself in the future of uncomfortable situations. But there's like this bottom line type of trigger or anxiety that kicks in from seemingly nothing. Now, one of the stuff that I would like to share is that there's always a trigger. But if I look back, for example, to the first time I had anxiety, I was about 15 or 16. I was smoking weed in that period of my life, although I don't think I was high when I got anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
It was after I took a caffeine pill. Now, it's very normal, and people need to know that it's very normal for anxiety to start between the age of about 13 and 20. That's usually when it starts for people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it's unchecked, it's like unchecked childhood issues.
Right.
They come out when you're older.
Right. It comes out when you're safe.
Right.
When you're in a space where it has the space to be expressed.
That's interesting because that's exactly when it came out by me. So
Yeah.
I was in a very comfortable place.
Yep. That makes so much sense.
And it came out. Now, if you don't check it, so if anxiety runs in your family.
Well, I'll tell you something else. Because your brain is wired to expect quote unquote danger, wired to expect, whatever it is. And then when you're in a space where you're not having that, or you're in a space where that stops, that's when the anxiety starts, because your brain, your DNA, or your it's like predisposition to prepare you for this up and down, or this upheaval, or whatever it is that you're experiencing. And when that doesn't happen, because you're in a safe space, the anxiety is your brain kicking in and saying, here it is, it's happening.
That's also how childhood issues manifest. So
Yes.
we know
Yes.
people, and because we come from the community, I mean, it's like this across the board, but we grew up in a community life, so we know a lot about abuse and stuff like that. And people who leave that, right, they throw off the throes of religiosity or the community, and they say, I'm okay. They don't go for help. All of a sudden, at 25, after they're married and they have kids, or at some later stage, all of a sudden it comes out all these issues. What happened? I thought you were okay. Like
Right.
you're going to be different than your
Right.
parents. You don't have these issues. You're not going to hit your children. All of a sudden it comes out. So the idea of a safe space manifests itself. The consequence of a safe space, in this sense, in these senses, manifests itself in various ways. But anxiety is very similar like that.
Anxiety is one of them.
It could just come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
What seems to be completely random, and what I wanted to point out was that I had taken a caffeine pill.
Right. Back to the caffeine. So I also get very, very anxious.
And it triggered it for the first time then. So
Yeah.
Obviously by now I know caffeine, sugar, things that stimulated my heart rate and my blood to flow differently or to feel differently were some triggers. But back then I didn't know that. So it seemed like, what's going on? All of a sudden I feel like I'm fainting, I'm dying, I'm heart palpitations. And it's completely uncomfortable. And I mean, needless to say, anyone who has had anxiety, especially bad anxiety, that leads to panic attacks and stuff like that, is so devastating.
It's crippling. It's
yeah,
really
I mean,
crippling.
there's no other way to say it. It's just so destructive to your own mental health, to your own well-being. You feel so disgusting. You feel so trapped in it. And for so many years, it was on and off for me. So you deal with it, you think you have it under control, then it kicks back in a completely different way.
Right. You know why? Because as we level up and as we heal, the anxiety will show up in different ways.
Right.
Because that means you're ready for more, or you're ready to face more, or ready to deal with more of whatever it is that was wired to prepare you to protect yourself.
There's a huge connection of anxiety to death. So what's essentially happening, and I've really thought about this a lot, and this is going to tie into some of the ways that we could learn to cope. Because think about the worst anxiety that you have, these panic attacks that are based off of nothing or even something.
I think it's always connected to something.
When I say nothing, I already mentioned earlier, it's seemingly nothing.
Right.
Meaning you don't know the trigger, you don't understand what's happening. There could be
Generally, it was triggered by something, though. Right.
It's always triggered by something.
Yeah.
Anxiety can't just kick in from a vacuum.
Right.
But seemingly nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about this, like anxiety that kicks in, these panic attacks, these uncomfortabilities from seemingly nothing, they just kick in. Ultimately, what is scaring you? Granted, you might be having a heart palpitation or you're panicking a little bit. Now, my anxiety used to, it's a vicious cycle. What happens is something triggers it, and I always wondered what happens first, the heart or the brain. They say the brain because your heart and other mechanics can't be triggered on their own, right? So it has to be your brain, but there's literally an instant between when your brain got triggered and when your heart starts bugging out. Because the fear is in the heart.
Correct, but I want to think that sometimes the body reacts first. Because if you're experiencing something physically, sometimes people are triggered by weather. Is it in the mind?
So that's the thing. There's a very, very, very fine line, and I've thought about this so much.
Or even somebody that was abused.
I've thought about it. What's happening first? Well, from like a technical standpoint, they're going to say, well, your body doesn't even feel the weather or the wind without your mind processing it first. So it has to go through the mind. The reason I questioned it was because I'm so in tune with my body, hyper aware, which is one of the reasons why I'm prone to get anxious so much.
Right, exactly.
I'm too aware.
Right.
If my heart beats one beat, a drop off,
You're aware
it
of
shoots it to my head. Right. Now, there's this very, very fine line, and what I would realize, because I'm too aware of my body and its functions and all that it's doing at every minute, I would sometimes feel like my heart started racing or bugging out before my mind even knew that I was afraid. And then it would make me question, is my heart somehow getting anxious? And then my mind is like, oh my God, what's happening? Now I'm bugging out because I'm bugging out. So I would question that. And that remains to be a mystery. And I think it will be. But for people who are really delving into anxiety and trying to figure out the triggers and what's happening first, a lot of that mechanical stuff doesn't matter so much. Getting into that level of technicality,
sometimes it makes it worse, though.
Makes it worse.
It makes it worse.
100%.
You start overthinking.
You agonize over the tiny details.
Right.
I could tell you now from a broader perspective, because I've worked on it for so many years, how to deal with those phenomenons without getting too technical about it. But these are interesting thoughts and things to explore nonetheless, because they're prevalent with almost everyone who has it. So you're going to think in. And I thought on these gruesome levels, what was happening? Am I having a heart palpitation, then I'm bugging out, or am I bugging out, then I have a heart palpitation?
I never thought about that so much, but having said that, I want to say that if the studies show that it's in the mind first, that even if you're not aware of it, it could be on a subconscious level.
Well, it's
a subconscious level. So you're not actually aware of it, but it's actually
that too.
Something in your mind was triggered.
I agree, and also it could be the timing difference could just be so small that it seems in reverse. It's just that something could have triggered your mind. It shoots it right away, almost instantaneously to your heart. So that's where you're really feeling the fear.
Yeah, I usually feel it in my chest.
I'll give you an example. You might think that the fear is really in your brain. Your brain is really just the one that's thinking all these confusing thoughts.
Your brain is just reacting.
Right.
Well, then that goes back to mind versus body. If your body is tensing up or your heart rate's going up, your brain is telling you fight or flight. So that's interesting.
Well, your brain is trying to process.
Your brain is trying to protect you.
Because
your body tensed up and got anxious.
Correct. Well, that's why I said before, it remains to be a mystery.
Yeah.
If you get very technical about, is it the body or the mind? It remains to be a mystery.
Well, we're not the scientists.
I've researched it extensively and read a lot of science on it. It doesn't matter so much. Different scientists will believe different things because it's something that's still in progress. They're literally just researching and trying to figure it out. Because like I said, it's a fluke. It's something that, and by the way, for those who don't know, there's no medical way to solve it yet. Because it's this little fluke in evolution or in our bodies, biology. Well, not because the correlation doesn't work that way, but on another note, they don't have a way to solve it. Now they give us,
because anxiety is a mind illness, so to speak, there isn't going to be a medication or something like that for it. Right, but let's say for me, my therapist did DBT therapy with me, which brings you into mindfulness, coming into the moment. Because generally when you're anxious, you're either in the past or the future. You're not right here in this moment. So DBT therapy was extremely, extremely helpful. It helped me take my mind from wherever it was, bring it back into this moment through.
What does DBT tell our listeners?
So I don't know the exact full definition that goes under it, but DBT does stand for dialectical behavioral therapy. And it incorporates a lot of mindfulness, coming into this moment, using sensory. So, she would recommend either taking a bath or a shower, something that hits your sensory system. Watching something or listening to something or getting busy with an activity that distracts your mind from that cycle of thoughts that's going around and around and around, the ruminating, the overthinking. And coming into awareness of where you're at right now, reminding your brain you're not in danger right here, right now. And I found it extremely, extremely helpful.
That's really cool.
Yeah. It's practice and it really takes time, because then what you're actually doing is rewiring your brain to recognize that you're not in a dangerous situation.
Yeah. A lot of the ways that I've figured out how to deal with it tie into similar methodology.
Yeah.
In talking about, if we're going to get into ways to deal with it, and that brings me back to a point that I didn't finish. There's so much to share on this topic. I could sit for 10 hours straight, and especially if it's in a dialogue type of way like we are right now, everything you say or anyone who has dealt with anxiety will trigger endless thoughts, and I don't want to lose track of some of the important points.
Sure.
We're going to talk about ways to deal with it. I was saying earlier that there's a connection between our ultimate destruction. What is our ultimate destruction? Death. When you have anxiety, despite the nitty gritties at the heart, the mind, when you're freaking out, you're bugging the fuck out. You think you're gonna die. Everything you're losing control over yourself.
Completely trapped.
But ultimately, what's the fear? Oh my God. What are you bugging out about? Right. If nothing's going to happen, you're not bugging out.
Right.
You're bugging out ultimately because you think something's wrong with you. You're going to destruct. You're going to die. You're going to lose consciousness. Whatever it is. Now, it also ties into letting go, which we're going to get to. But it ties into the ultimate destruction, which is something's going to happen to you. You're going to die. You're going to go crazy. You're going to pass out. Something's going to happen. You're going to have a heart attack, right? And this could be completely subconscious.
It's like this uphill battle.
But this is fight or flight.
And builds. Right.
What is fight or flight? You think you're either going to die. Right. You're wired to save yourself.
Right.
To run or fight because you want to stay alive. It's self-preservance. You need to stay alive. We're wired to want to stay alive.
Right.
So when we start talking about dealing with anxiety, one of the huge things, and there's so many tricks, I have to really be mindful and think about the various ways in which I've learned to deal with it. There's a lot of physical. There's different categories of methods. There's physical.
Mm-hmm.
There's mental, and there's spiritual. There's literally mental practices you could do to help anxiety. There's physical things you could do. There's spiritual things you could do. One of the first things that's really important to think about is this underlying fear.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to destruct. You're going to die. Something like the ultimate, what's really behind the fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fight or flight we said was good, but we don't want to have these kinds of reactions when it comes to mundane things. If you're going to go socialize with your friends or people you don't know, or if you're about to do public speaking, if you're about to fly in a plane, you don't want to have those kinds of reactions. You don't want to feel like you're dying and have the reactions that you would if you were actually in danger. So when it comes to these mundane activities that are potentially triggering your anxiety, we need to get very mindful about the whole death situation. And I could say this now in retrospect, obviously this is a lot harder at 17 and 20, even though I knew this, but then I was still actively deploying my little brain ideas to get this under control. But at this point, I already have done it for so many years that I've gotten somewhat of a control over it.
You have a lot more awareness at this point.
You have
what
to
it is.
you have to think about death, and not think about meaning think about death all day, meaning you have to think about it and don't shy away from it if you want to solve your anxiety, with the goal of reaching a certain level of comfort about death. Ultimately, the whole fight and flight, all the scary it's all because you're scared you're gonna die, something's gonna happen to you. You have to think about it on enough, even if it's for a couple of years, a couple of months, meditate on it and do certain things to gain a certain level of comfort that everything that comes goes. Humans come and go. We will die. And reaching a certain level of comfort, which could take a lot of years.
I actually really, really like this point that you're talking about, because I want to say I have feared death. I think I still do.
Rabbi Nachman talks, I read it somewhere so many years ago. He writes somewhere that he had a crazy fear of death. But he had passed away in his 30s, very young. But he writes later on that, or he wrote it all together, that at a certain point he had conquered it.
So we know it's possible.
There's that. There was something else there. It slipped my mind, but if you go very, very deep into your fears and anxieties, you're afraid of heights, you're afraid of flying, whatever it is, it's because you're afraid to die. You're afraid to let go. Let go and dying, they're synonymous.
Hand in hand.
They go hand in hand. Now, I also have a great fear of letting go. For example, I have a fear to skydive, not because of the wind or the height. I'm afraid to let go. That lunge.
That's where the fear lies.
Right. But ultimately, behind all of that is fear of death, because you're afraid if you let go. Now, these are all things that we're wired to think, again, to protect us. We know how gravity works. We know if something goes wrong, you go to the ground, you die. But ultimately, the death is the end, at least in your mind. So you have to think enough about death in order to start working on getting comfortable with the idea of dying. I think it's very important. You're going to try, if you have been dealing with anxiety, you're going to try so many other tricks that's literally dancing around the issue.
Right.
If you're going to try these meditations, this, that, the other, and it may make you feel better, but then it kicks back in and you're in this roller coaster of ups and downs, you're dancing around the issue of death. If you go straight to the core.
Of the fear. The core of the fear.
It may be difficult for people.
It's very difficult.
Especially if you're younger.
But it's worse if you leave it unchecked, because the anxiety and the fears build and grow and grow and grow. If you allow them to, they will continue to grow. If you deal with them and face them and come to acceptance, they start to diminish.
That's kind of what I'm aiming at. That you may find tricks, and even I'll share tricks and you can share tricks, physical, emotional, mental. But if you don't deal with the crux of it all, that you're afraid to die, you're afraid to destruct, you're afraid to let go, all these things are synonymous. If you can't get yourself to deal with that,
think about
ultimately you're not going to get rid of your anxiety completely.
Right. That's why I have an insatiable thirst of understanding. But then you do run the risk of ruminating and overthinking. So there's observation, like removed observation, thinking about things, understanding them, understanding the fear with almost no emotion involved, just like an observer, versus getting stuck in that cycle of overthinking. So it's important to be an observer about your fear. Right. Almost like a bystander, completely removed.
If you compartmentalize, you see that there's a way to approach that, not to get stuck in it. If it's your first 5-10 years in anxiety, there are people who have anxiety their entire life. They never deal with it. Absolutely. If you're new to anxiety, kind of like us, where you only have it, let's say, from your young teenage years into your young adult. So if it's in your first 5-10 years of anxiety and you're going to start thinking about this idea of acceptance of death, then you will overthink it. You will bug out about it.
Absolutely.
I've agonized over these thoughts for years in cycles.
Absolutely. With death, I can really relate. That
But
is something I had an intense fear of, and I would say now is a little bit less, but I still have.
Right. But what's my point? That if
It's
you do that,
to letting go, though,
it's
because
all
in
one.
death we have no control.
Destruct, heart attack, those kinds of fears. Death and letting go is all synonymous.
Well, letting go, I would say, is probably one of the biggest things connected to death, but also pain. People are afraid of pain in death. Letting go, though, we all want to have control. Nobody wants to walk away.
Before I slip away, see, you're afraid of the phenomenon of getting stuck in the cycle of these thoughts and overthinking.
Right.
But what I wanted to say was, if it's your first 5-10 years in anxiety, dealing with anxiety,
you may get stuck in it.
You will get stuck in it. But that's what I said before, if you do it with the goal, you don't want to agonize over death, law of attraction, and think about death all day and destruction. It's a practice. You have to compartmentalize. If you're doing it for the goal of helping get past certain anxieties, you will progress, and the thought of death is going to become boring at some point. If you don't do it with that goal and you agonize, you could agonize your whole life. So there's a huge distinction there in what the purpose of thinking about death is. I want you to think about death just enough to start getting comfortable with the idea that you will die.
That is part of life.
Stop running. Yes.
Death is part of life.
Stop. If not, it's almost like if there's no death, there is no life. What's the value, this awesome thing of life? What is that element, that substance that we're so happy about and we feel so grateful for? It's because it's a gem. You do die. So we're here in this spiritual experience for an X amount of years.
We're contributing.
So you don't want to get stuck agonizing about death, but you want to think it from a meditative standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me when I tell you this is years and years. Like I don't know how to bring it across to the listener, like what it means, years of like it'll be hard for years just dealing with this thought. But as Gneshe just said, she feels better about it now, and that's not everyone. What about the people who don't deal with it and feel worse as they get older about it and build up bigger phobias? Now, I don't know how much you may know about anxiety, but there's obviously so many different types of anxieties.
Right.
There's social anxiety. It goes on to people get anxious about anything. It could be public speaking, socializing, heights. There's phobias that you build up. Oh, the bridge is going to collapse under me. In every type of anxiety, there are different tricks and different mindfulness techniques and different ways to approach it. I personally have had anxiety in a number of different places, and I know a lot of the triggers. I figured a lot of this stuff out over the years. For example, phobias of something going wrong. I got it 100% from movies. You see bridges collapsing, buildings falling, fires happening.
Because you've never experienced that.
It is almost impossible. Because you remember I said I'm hyper aware. That's my personality, my emotional, my soul.
Yeah.
It's funny. I don't know if you're into astrology, but if you look at August 14, which is my birthday, one of the first things it says, like, these individuals are like very aware. Oh. And it's so funny because there's very little that slips by me on a personal and interpersonal level. Mm-hmm. Human behavior, my own thoughts, the way that my body feels. We also get it from Bubby. Bubby's very our whole family is very in touch with our bodies, right? How come when we eat sugar, we get anxious? The other person who's eating sugar and Laffy Taffies and Gushers for breakfast, he has no problem.
I ate a yogurt the other day. Too
much protein and sugar.
I thought it was, I didn't know what it was. I literally didn't know. And I ate some grapes. So it was a Greek yogurt with grapes.
Oh, no,
so a couple hours later, I'm sweating. Literally, I had to change my sweat. Everything.
I know that.
So I call mommy and I'm telling her, when I tell people that when I'm hungry, I can't, like, it's a real thing. I can't go hungry. And I tell her what I ate. And she's like, Gneshe, I get that every time I eat yogurt on an empty stomach. The 9 grams of sugar. Or the grapes. The grapes also have natural sugar. Sweating. So yeah, we're hyper aware.
All of that.
Caffeine, I get the same reaction.
I told Sharon, don't buy red milk. Buy even red milk, which is too what is it called?
Fat.
Too like it's too much dairy, too much lactose, too much saturated.
Yeah, it's much. I forgot
what the word is.
Fattier. It's much thicker.
So, but yogurt for sure. Yogurt is full of protein and sugar. If people like us who are too in tune with our body.
Yeah.
See, most people are not in tune with their body on that level. I have it on a hyper level, but like I said, my heartbeat can't. If it beats a drop slower one time,
You notice it.
I notice, and now that used to trigger anxiety and fear. I've learned to get that under control.
Yeah.
But I'm hyper aware. But I know most people in our family have that level, and it comes from it's DNA. I know Bubby's very aware of her body, and others. So
I actually didn't know that Bubby's like that.
Yeah, very aware of her body. That's why she's all into natural and health and all that stuff. So yogurt, for example, if you mix protein, so most people don't even realize they could stuff their body with cigarettes and sugar and caffeine.
This is my question. Do they not realize, or does not everyone react that way?
100% they react that way. Their body reacts the same. Their heart rate goes up. They get parched the same way. Your body, everyone's body, for the most part, reacts the same, unless you're an anomaly, but it reacts the same to caffeine. That's why people love caffeine, sugar, and all that stuff.
But I want to think if people are sweating and shaking the way I am from caffeine.
No. They don't get the anxiety. That's the difference.
That caffeine is actually triggering
Their
anxiety.
increase in heart rate doesn't trigger anxiety. By you, it does. By me, if my blood flows differently, if my heart rate goes up, it'll trigger anxiousness.
Anxiety.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, that's
Not everyone, the fight or flight kicks in. It's misinterpreting that your heart rate went up, that there's some kind of fear.
Okay.
Really, there's no fear. I just drank a coffee.
I never connected that. Okay.
The fight or flight is being triggered by often silly and insignificant things. This leads people with anxiety to live a different life, essentially a more healthy life.
Or to cope with
Why?
it. So then that would be unhealthy.
Because if you're a person with anxiety, the way to move forward is not to drown yourself in caffeine.
Right.
The way to move forward is to stay away from caffeine. You don't need caffeine.
Right.
You need to be your heart needs to be
at a
calm.
steady rate.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
People with anxiety are literally being guided by God to live a certain way. You don't belong being that person who eats gushers for lunch. So if you get to, and Bubby taught me this. So when I was out in Washington, I'm trying to think if I had really my anxiety kicked in after Washington.
After that?
But you know what it was? I must have visited because I had lived there. I came back. Anxiety kicked in. I was having issues here. I went back for a little bit, and so I spoke about my anxiety with her.
Well, also, you know what happened. You went there, you had safe space. You came back here, you got triggered. So you went back to your safe space.
Yeah.
That's
a cool
really
observation. And what she told me was she then told me this idea, and I've seen it to be true, and it could potentially help others. It's a guide. It's almost like a guiding light. She said it exactly like this. Anxiety, when you have anxiety, it's your body telling you that something is wrong in your life. Something is off.
Absolutely.
So if you look at it as a message,
it's a guiding light.
Right. And that is that is amazing.
It's your personal guidance.
In that sense, if you look at it as a message to change a pattern.
Yes. However, that's when you have to differentiate when it's just a trigger because of a past or if it's actually trying to teach you something. Either way, you have to
Certainly.
learn.
Certainly.
Either way, you have to learn. Either to sit with it and work through it so that you don't get anxiety from it again because it's not a danger anymore, or because it's your inner voice telling you something that you're doing isn't right. So either way, it's a learning curve.
True.
It's
You
contrast.
have to
It's
compartmentalize.
contrast.
If
Anytime there's contrast, there's something to learn from it.
if caffeine or drugs or things that are not necessarily beneficial to your health are triggering your anxiety, it's just a call to change your patterns in life and to live more aligned with who you are, because you will fight it otherwise your entire life. When you're getting anxiety from walking into a social setting, that's not a call not to socialize.
Exactly.
You have to compartmentalize.
Exactly.
100%.
That's where you need to work through.
You need intellect to understand.
Correct.
But we have to deal with one aspect at a time. So on the aspect of the guide, think about it and tell this to yourself. Anxiety, and in this sense, even the stuff that you don't have to shy away from, it's still a guiding light. This holds true. Anxiety is telling you that something's wrong in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Something has to change.
Yeah.
Figuring out what it is, can sometimes be difficult. But if you go for help, get educated, it becomes more and more clear. Even if you're getting triggered from something silly, like walking into a wedding and you're going to socialize with people,
Mm-hmm.
that statement still holds true. It's still telling you that something has to change, meaning there's something else that's triggering it.
Exactly.
Again, anxiety is telling you that something's wrong. Doesn't mean that you going in is wrong. It means that something in your life is triggering you to feel anxious about going into the wedding.
Exactly.
And you have to fix that.
Correct.
So we have to view anxiety from the standpoint of Hashem trying to guide us, the people who have it, to live a certain life. And that doesn't mean that the people who don't have it aren't guided divinely to live the life they live. They have it in different ways.
Right. Their physical body's not reacting. They
Right.
could be having contrast in other ways.
Right.
I like to say contrast because it's not good. It's not good. It's not bad.
Right.
It just is. So it's something that is making you aware. If something comes up that you're becoming aware of that you don't like, that's contrast. So then you ask yourself.
Well, that's the evolution of this whole thought process. Is that first we say that anxiety is the most destructive thing in our generation, and you may think of it in such terms. As you get educated about it, on it, and start dealing with it, you start realizing that for you personally, it's a positive thing.
Right.
Because it's there to help guide you. And in that sense, no, it's not good or bad. Everything is good, according to the principles of Amunah. But we need this education, this understanding
in order to either wake up or it's a wake-up call.
We need this understanding to understand why it's good, and this is what we're getting to. I mean, there's this whole journey that you go through in learning all of these things and getting better and better at it. So that's astonishing. I mean, on the various levels. So phobias. Right, we get carried away. I told you this is going to happen over and over. We'll get carried away because there's so many points to be said. I told you hyper-awareness. This is where I got sidetracked. I go over a bridge. It is nearly impossible, even if I'm having a good conversation with someone in the car then, that I won't think, it won't be in my head that the bridge could collapse and we all die. It's impossible for me to go over the bridge. It's impossible for me to fly without thinking that the plane's going to crash into the ocean.
Yeah.
Movies. 100% from movies. If I go under a bridge, just a little overpass, I think about the sign of the bridge falling on my face.
I'm the same way.
Okay?
I remember you telling
Tati's
me.
like that.
Tati's like that. But I remember you telling me we were driving on the highway once about these cars that are like racing after you, and I'm quoting with my fingers, like, you're thinking that these cars, these cars that are like changing lanes, they're running out. So I have it. I remember telling you I have it. It's a lot of times at night. I'll turn on a certain street, and then you realize this car is following you, and they like, why is there high beams on? Like, where are they going? And then And my imagination is taking me to, oh, they pull up beside me. They jump out. They're hijacking my car.
These are sick.
So, but this is also an overactive imagination. Not everyone has that.
No.
We know that Tati's like that.
Not.
And we know where we get it from.
Of course not.
But, you could take something simple as that, and you can or cannot cause your anxiety to be worse with that. A lot of it is mind control.
I'm going to get to that. What's funny is,
but I do want to say another
that.
thing. That with healing, and we're not going to get into that again now, it does subside. It's not as intense. It's not there all the time. So I'll be on a plane and I'll have the thought of, it'll crash or it'll fall. But I'll think of that story of that woman who, was sucked out of the window. One of the plane windows were smashed. But I'll just gently bring my mind back to the present moment. So it's not that it doesn't happen, but it's not taking you over. It's not causing anxiety anymore. That's through healing. But anyway, back to what you were saying.
You said not everyone has that, and I wanted to emphasize it. Not everyone has that.
Overactive imagination.
Like I said in the beginning, it's DNA.
Yeah.
And I was just in Israel, so we're sitting in the flight for our plane back. This is so funny. I mean, people live this.
Classic.
I'm sitting on the plane with my girlfriend, and we're supposed to leave. Right, we're supposed to leave Israel. We're going to fly to New York. There's a delay. Okay, great. I'm going to be sitting for 12 hours like a sardine. It's sickening how aviation, in that sense, hasn't changed yet. But that's a whole other podcast. We sit like sardines for 12 hours too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 2019. Let's go. Chop, chop.
Chop, chop.
But anyway.
It should all be first class.
I'm sitting it should be a 2-hour flight. And then from there, a 30-minute flight.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean,
I hear.
Nothing's changed in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
The whole airport system is messed up.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting in the plane. And they call out over the mic. Okay, so we're sitting there for an hour. There's a delay. They don't even say anything. Whatever, we're sitting. And then he says, okay, there was a problem with the engine. They had to change the valve.
Oh, thanks.
And exactly. That's how somebody with anxiety thinks, wow.
I had that when I was in Cancun.
Have to just tell me that?
They had delayed us because of a crazy thunderstorm. And then it's still raining, but they're like, okay, we can take off now. And I'm thinking, like, are you sure this is safe?
I'm thinking, first of all, how often does this happen? Pilot, you need to tell the passengers, like, this is okay. This happens every couple months. Yeah. This is how my mind thinks. Right. And then I right away draw on, and this is what happens. This is how anxiety, you draw on real life events and scenarios to back up your anxiety. Right before I left the U.S. to Israel, there was in the news this plane that took off 3 times and was returned each time for unrelated mechanical issues. And then they grounded the plane. Nothing happened, but it takes off. It has a mechanical issue. It returns 3 times.
That's terrible.
2-3 weeks later, I'm on a plane that has mechanical issues, and I'm about to take off.
Yeah.
We draw on real life events to back up our insanity and our creative
but
stupidity.
Again, I want to go back to healing because I've experienced it. My mind will go to the real life situation, but from healing, I can bring it back to, I'm going to trust that I'm safe right now.
Right.
And I try to remind myself that if something does happen, it's not in my hands. I'm doing the best that I can do.
I'm with you.
But I couldn't have done that before healing. I couldn't have rationalized with the irrational part of my brain.
I'm with you. And for me, the healing process is similar, but for me, not from healing, that is healing. So the way that I look at it is, number one, the idea of death. That is its own entity that needs to be dealt with, and we're going to put that aside now. Once you acknowledge that, and that works in the background as you practice all these other things, that death concept has to be there because you don't want to ignore it. No. I'm with you. One of the first main points in dealing with it I wanted to point out was that I don't let these things hold me back. So let's get into some of the nitty-gritty.
Well, that's where we come to cognitive behavioral therapy. If you're going to do avoidance behavior, the anxiety is going to grow. Like I said earlier, it's going to grow and grow.
Yeah.
You need, and you can do it with professional help.
And you live your entire life avoiding situations. We know people who just don't go anywhere, don't do anything because
of it. because
they're avoiding
the
it, and it gets
anxiety
worse and
morphed
worse.
into this huge
Yeah.
monster. And it's a real thing. And what I'm going to say is that when it's at that point, you most likely do need professional help. And even if it's not at that point,
You need professional
seek
help
professional
right
help.
away, but at that point, you need more than help.
Yeah.
You need blessings.
Well, you need both.
You need God to intervene.
You need both. You really need both.
Yeah, but really you need both along the whole journey, and that's why it's important. The younger you tackle these things, we're going to get to age, DNA. First, I want to just say that the first step in the healing process is not to run away, hide, and give up.
That's the worst thing to do.
You have to acknowledge and commit to facing it head on. And this is what I've done. So, airplanes, for example. I had a natural fear of airplanes. Not heights. I'm going back years now. Airplanes. Anxiety, turbulence. When there's turbulence, the anxiety kicks in, all these stuff. Okay. Almost everyone in our family has anxiety from flying or doesn't even fly at all.
Well, when we're sitting on the plane and Tati turns to the woman next to us during turbulence and tells her, "What if we all go down and we're going down together?"
Tati's great. He says, this plane is like a cigarette in the sky, just like a cigar. Just imagine it just starts
rolling.
Rolling.
Completely out of control, basically. It's again the concept of having no control over your body.
Right. And that's over your
physical
expressions
body.
too. But this is how his mind thinks. Now, it never stopped me from flying. I fly to Oman every year.
Mm-hmm.
I go to Israel every other year, and I go places. So because I never allowed it to stop me from flying, and now that's just one point I want to bring out, and it's like that with everything. Socializing. Mm-hmm. Substances, weed, it makes you kind of like an introvert. It made my social capacity, my capacity to socialize worse.
But then you have the opposite also that becomes an issue. Sometimes people drink alcohol in order to feel comfortable in social situations, which could morph into an addiction.
Right. Well, that's
you have both. You have both ends.
That's a whole other aspect of
right.
it. But what I did was I never stopped socializing. And my point is I always faced it head on.
You had the awareness that it was uncomfortable, and you forced yourself to do it anyway.
And I still do.
And that's what I'm saying about
not comfortable. I can't say I'm 100% comfortable flying.
Right.
All those thoughts will be there, but I do it anyway,
right.
And I don't get a panic attack if the plane starts having turbulence. So now, let's go a step further. One plane ride that I had an abnormal turbulence experience, which was traumatic.
Absolutely.
And I've spoken to a lot of people who fly often and they haven't had it. So this is not just like the type of turbulence. It was unusual. It was very, very powerful. We were going back or from Ukraine, and the plane, I remember I'm hanging out in the back of the plane with my friends. We're drinking some vodka and just socializing, and there was a little bit of turbulence. I turned to my friend Avrami because I see he's bugging out a little bit from it. Because I'm the same way, and I tell him, this is nothing. Like, it gets worse, as a joke.
And it got worse.
A couple minutes later, the pilot says, "Please sit down. There's gonna be some turbulence." That's it. Everyone sits down. Yeah, you're okay. There's gonna be some turbulence.
I'm like getting goosebumps listening to this.
People get anxious just hearing this. Okay, you're gonna face death. It's fine.
It's
right?
so uncomfortable.
This is how your mind thinks. Okay,
it's
let's
frightful.
get ready to die.
Yeah.
But you're not thinking that. You think it's gonna. You're not thinking. Okay. And the turbulence starts. Starts out with a couple of rattles. Just saying the word rattles. The plane. Yeah. The wings, the
bumps,
back.
It shakes.
And it starts, and then it hit really bad turbulence. The plane was dropping hundreds, if not thousands of feet at a time. Up, down. We're talking about smacking. God. Think like rough roller coaster. G-force.
Oh, my God.
It was so bad that the compartments
were opening up.
Suitcases were flying down. Lights were blinking. It was at night. It was dark. Passengers are shrieking and grabbing each other. It was that bad. Shrieking.
That's very scary.
Up, down.
How long did it go on for?
I was sitting right next to some random girl, and we didn't grab each other. We were both holding on, like, we're going to tough it out. Like, some Russian
I'm
girl.
going down in this seat.
Me, Tati's mentality, I'm going to die, like,
right.
Not a word, but I'm anxious beyond belief, right? Because this is the ultimate fear. We're going to die now.
This was fight. You were having a fight reaction versus flight because there was nowhere to go.
There's nowhere.
You were going to tough it up, martyr it out, and get through it.
Exactly. I'm just holding on, like, trying to keep my heart rate, and I didn't panic, right? My heart rate shot up, obviously.
But you were in the
that's
moment.
A good reaction because
it
was a violent situation. Right. So that's normal to happen. But I stayed in it, stayed conscious, didn't shriek, didn't faint or try to run or do anything. Other people were shrieking.
That is terrifying.
There was this veteran sitting there, shut up! He's yelling at people to shut up.
Because it makes it worse. It makes
for him, die in peace. And this went on for a couple minutes, and it was really horrible, and it chilled out.
How long was it?
It felt like forever, obviously, but it was probably just a couple minutes. Maybe it was 5-10 minutes. It wasn't just short. It was a little long, and you hear the plane trying to get through it, like they're thrusting the engines full, and then they're letting off, and it's quiet. And then they're thrusting again because I think they try to speed through it sometimes if you can't avoid it. I don't know what. It was horrible. I've flown probably 20, 30 times. That's never happened. And they're almost always turbulence.
These are the kind of things you hear about in articles because it's not so. It's unusual. It doesn't happen all the time.
Now, what happened? This was a couple of years ago. That didn't stop me from flying. If anything, I went home. Naturally, I have to research. I have to know. And I'm researching wings and turbulence and how strong planes are. Can a plane fall apart from turbulence? I need to know these things.
Will I survive this the next time it happens?
And you watch Boeing videos, how they construct wings and how much pressure it can handle. I spoke to your husband Zushi about it.
Yeah.
It could help settle some stupid thoughts because the statistics are great. The wings are strong. They're not falling apart from turbulence. But if you agonize, again, compartmentalization, if you agonize over those videos, it'll create subconscious fears.
Yes, that makes sense.
Mommy mentioned on Shabbos this person's podcast who he did drugs. He was clean, him and his buddy. They did this podcast. Yes. And then his buddy relapsed after he had some drugs.
He was years of clean.
And what I thought about that was that, law of attraction, you both of you guys are clean, but your whole life revolves around talking about, you literally think law of attraction, all day you're talking about drugs and people who are addicted and the idea of relapsing. You surround your life and guess what?
Your life is surrounded by that.
It happened to one of the guys, and then he died from the overdose. Yeah. One of the podcast hosts had hurt himself. He got some painkillers, and he relapsed, and he passed away. Yeah. And the other guy is still doing a podcast. Yeah. In that sense, it's that agonizing. It's the law of attraction.
How much energy are you putting into the fear and the pain? And
this is what I was discussing with Zach.
And how much energy are you putting into the healing?
Right.
And the growing?
So I watch some videos. I don't agonize over the videos. So I watch the videos. They make me feel better. The planes are strong. They're not falling apart from turbulence. I had a bad experience.
They're created to endure something like that.
Then there are people who watch and watch and watch. And I've done this myself because I fall into these cycles. I have anxiety. I'm that personality that does these stupid patterns and triggers myself and creates these issues. But I'm also aware enough and educated enough to get myself out of it. So this other time, me and my friend were planning to go with our families to Florida for Pesach. Mm-hmm. And I think it was during the Trump elections or something, maybe a couple of years ago. A little before, and we're partners in e-commerce, and I'm sitting and watching these airplane videos and different things, and I built up a little bit of a phobia, and this comes to show, and I fly every year. You think you have it under control, you think you're comfortable. If you do the wrong things, within a couple of weeks, you could just build up a fear. I'm watching these videos, and I just don't feel comfortable flying, and me and him build up this little phobia about flying.
So you guys
you're thinking in your mind the plane's going to crash. Right, sadist. So what do? We convince the women that they should fly with the kids, and we'll drive. This is what it means.
But that was avoidance behavior.
Yeah. And I knew nothing's going to happen on the plane. It's not like I'm sending my wife on a plane that's going to crash and they're going to die. I know it's stupidity.
I want to tell you more about avoidance behavior.
Sure.
You lie to yourself. You make it your truth. You make it your truth.
Oh, yeah.
You had every good reason in the book to be driving. You brought the food. You brought the luggage.
The minivan was packed. 24 hours in the car instead of jumping on a couple-hour flight because we're bugging out that something's going to go wrong.
So that's the problem with avoidance behavior. And if you're going to give into that and always go with avoidance behavior, the anxiety morphs into this huge, unstoppable monster. It's like a snowball.
It gets
starts
worse
rolling,
and
it
worse.
gets bigger and
so
bigger.
After that, and that's exactly how I felt inside. Now you didn't fly, let's say, for 8 months, and the bigger the gap gets, the bigger the phobia gets. I was telling Zach, force yourself to fly and fly often because you never get away from that little anxiousness 100%. Rather than build up the huge anxiousness that you get when you have when you avoid it. But I checked, and this was a couple years ago. This was just a couple years ago, and I'm flying every year.
And you still have uncomfortableness.
I just built it up over a couple weeks.
But you still have uncomfortableness.
Sure. I get on the plane. The pilot says there's a mechanical issue. I'm freaking out.
I think about it. I'm nervous, but I breathe through it.
Oh, what I wanted to say then was that, so I'm sitting there with my girlfriend. Nothing even crosses our mind that there's anything potentially, because there is nothing wrong. Right. This is a normal person that doesn't have anxiety.
Well, this is a person who also doesn't have an overactive imagination.
Right. Nothing triggers them. There's turbulence, nothing. It's like a bump on the road.
Right.
And indeed, turbulence is so frequent and common almost on every plane ride. It is like bumps on a road.
Yeah.
And I've tried to tell myself that and be very mindful and kind of meditate on that.
I still kiss the ground every time I
arrive. Ultimately grateful. You're driving on the road, you're going to have bumps. It's the same thing.
The actual statistics of an auto accident
are much worse.
Are much higher.
Even dying in car accidents.
Thinking about driving out to Florida for 24 hours, and I'm thinking about all those...
So people say, well, it's the way you die. If something goes wrong in the ear, you have such a low chance of surviving, and you have all that fear going down. In a car, it's quick, it's over,
The bottom line is...
That comes back down to accepting the idea of death. Right. Yes, you may have the worst fear of your life for 1 or 2 minutes.
Because when you're on a plane, you have no control. Really?
It's synonymous.
Truthfully, we never have control. It's like limited our control. Our control is only in the actual actions that we do.
Well, this is one of the ways to...
But even in a car, you're not necessarily in control if somebody smacks into you.
This is one of the ways to start learning how to let go. The mindfulness that there's a God, there's a divine, there's a bigger picture, bigger than your control, and regardless of where it is, will help you understand that if you're supposed to die in a plane ride, you're dying in a plane ride. If you're supposed to die in a car, you're dying in a car. If you're supposed to die, you're dying. Right. Stop trying to control that's like the one thing we don't control, if we control anything, is when we die.
Like I'll just avoid thinking about it.
Of course, that's natural.
But that's connected to the fear.
That's why that brings it back full circle to that idea of we have to package that up. And along our journey of dealing with anxiety with all these tricks and mindfulness and meditations and all these different things, that works. That's also there. Never, because when you want to run and hide from it, you remind yourself, oh, it's supposed to be there. Yeah. Don't run away from it. I still have to
That's your inner voice.
I have to get control over you. I have to be comfortable with the idea that I'm going to die, and how I die is not up to me. Right. So that always has to be there. Really amazing. So now. We could talk about some other tricks and other types of anxiety. So that's plane rides. So what's interesting? I don't have a fear of heights if I'm enclosed in an airplane, for example. And I built up an anxiety over the past year or two. Being on the side of a building really high up creates this anxiety in me. Yeah. Like if I'm on an elevator in the Sheraton Hotel going up, looking down, there's something about that visual that is just so...
Yeah. Well, I did trapeze on the west side of Manhattan. It was terrifying. But it was the same concept of letting go. You're holding this rope, this bar on a rope, But you're, I don't know how many stories up.
You
need to walk off that ledge.
I get dizzy just visualizing what you're saying.
Like I'm sweating talking
because
about it. Like my palms are starting to
yes,
sweat.
if I think about the visuals of that kind of, I literally get
so
dizzy.
I was taken there for a trip as a treat, as a surprise, and I forced myself to do it. And I think we had 3 or 4 or 5 chances to go climb up that ladder and do it, and I forced myself to do it. If I wanted to be comfortable, I would have avoided it. I was extremely uncomfortable doing it, but I did it.
So I felt like I was building up a fear of heights, like similar to that kind of issue recently. And I want to face it head on, which is really interesting. It's funny how nuanced anxieties are for each person. For example, I could jump off of a 1 or 2 story porch.
No problem.
I could jump high.
Right.
It's within range.
Yeah.
But I realized once you get past a certain range, anxiety starts kicking in.
Right.
So I went to the indoor rock climbing in the past couple months.
And just
a couple weeks ago,
I
wanted to face it head on. I don't want it to get worse.
Like that. That's good.
So I'm climbing up these walls, and sure enough, 10 feet fine, 20 feet fine. After 20 feet, it just starts kicking in. I'm on a rope. If I let go, I'm fine.
You're hanging. You're protected.
She's telling me go, keep climbing, and okay, I'm processing it. I'm going to keep climbing, and as I climb higher and higher, and this is the first time I'm rock climbing, also.
Yeah.
My hands and muscles are tensing up so much because of the fear and anxiety. That's just the phobia that's rushing in my mind. You start seizing up. When I'm getting closer to the top, I can't even open my fingers because they're so tight and they're completely and I don't want to let go. And I know I had to let go for the first time to feel that rope. That's what you just kick off and let go. You kind of glide a couple feet. I forced myself to do it. Now, that anxiety is fresh. It didn't go away. I still have that. That's a recent one. I'm showing you how it shifts. First, it's planes. I get pretty comfortable with planes. Now it's heights, a specific type of height.
Right.
I let go, and I do it again, and I didn't overcome it. I rock climbed a couple times there. I had it. I couldn't get it under control in that one session. But that doesn't mean you give up. I just continue to do things. Now, when we go hiking, we've gone hiking. Yeah. Right, we've gone up
talking
there.
About that rock climbing one. What was
right, I forgot what the trail is called. That's exactly what I'm referring to. When we climb up that, so it ties into a little trick. Really, really interesting stuff that I just figured out on my own. When we climbed up that thing, it's 1 mile up or so, 1.5 or something.
That's it?
A mile and a half. Yeah, that's pretty high. Our adrenaline is high because we're working out.
Right.
When you get to the top and you have these overlooks, I don't have anxiety of that. I can stand near the ledge when my adrenaline is high.
When it's low.
That helped me realize something very, very interesting for people who have anxiety and want some tricks to deal with stuff. Adrenaline is stronger than anxiousness. And I've known this for some time, and I've used it in various ways. Adrenaline, whatever is releasing, adrenaline is stronger than anxiousness. If you are getting anxious, for example, another example, I'm having a meeting in business with some woman, and I used to get anxious in those kinds of settings. And I could potentially still get anxious if I'm going to meet somebody. Okay, so I'm having a meeting. It's more on the formal end, so it's more anxiety. And in the middle, I just start I hyperventilate, like I'm breathing wrong, and it's kicking in.
Right.
I tell her, I excuse myself. My partner might have been there, so they might have conversed. I have to check something in the warehouse. I go out.
Take a deep breath.
And I did push-ups. I dropped down. I started doing push-ups.
And they give you adrenaline.
Adrenaline goes up. It's stronger than anxiety. I come back in. I finish the meeting.
That's awesome.
So these are examples. So I've learned. So recently, one of our brothers, we were on a camping trip. He had a bad panic attack. It kicked in. Out of nowhere, just out of the blue, he's just having a bad panic attack. So I'm holding him close. I'm just, it's okay. You just breathe. Phobias. And I told him, try some push-ups. There's 2 things that are happening. If you're going to try to do adrenaline-based activities while you're having anxiety, 2 things. And he was having a hard time doing it, but he was forcing himself to do it. 2 things are happening. If you force yourself to focus on something other than your stupid thoughts while you're bugging out.
Well, that goes back to the DBT that I talked about.
Right.
You're breaking the cycle of your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's extremely difficult to do it. Your
100%.
brain
Well, when you're at the
wants
point
to.
of a panic attack, it could be really,
That's what I mean.
really
This
hard.
was in middle of a panic attack. He's hyperventilating. He thinks he's going to die. First, you're trying to calm him down, but that doesn't really help. I've had people try to calm me down. You're bugging out. Your brain
Right.
is playing games.
It needs to it's like a storm. It needs to kind of
Right.
blow through you and pass.
One of the ways to quickly try to do that is to get your adrenaline, to get your mind off of it, to get your thoughts off of it. So I'm telling him, drop down and do some push-ups. I know it's hard to do now, but that's exactly why it's going to work.
Did it help him?
Because it's so difficult to get your mind off of the fear-inducing thoughts. You are almost addicted to it. You want to feed it. Now, what? I have to go do push-ups while I'm bugging out? No. So these are two tricks integrated into one. Try something adrenaline. Try bringing up your adrenaline next time you get
jumping jacks
anxious.
even.
Anything stupid and mundane. You're not going to want to because you want to feed that fear subconsciously.
You want to be paralyzed by it.
Right.
You want to be in
Your
it.
body, it's not you. Your soul wants to be free. It wants to feel good, but your body is entrapping itself in these fears and it wants to feed it because it thinks it's fight or flight right now, but it's not. And the way to snap out of it is to do something completely mundane. So adrenaline, very interesting. I found that adrenaline is stronger than anxiety. If you're on the side, like if you have a fear of heights, but the building's on fire and you need to save someone, you'll find yourself being able to walk on the ledge, grabbing the person. You'll do something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do
Right.
because your adrenaline is high. And
But
adrenaline
that's
is there
not
to
fight.
help you in that sense. So that's one trick. Try that. If you're having anxiety, a panic attack, force yourself to do mundane things. Think mundane things. Have a conversation with someone instead of closing your eyes and agonizing and grabbing your head and you grab yourself. You're trying to
will pace.
right.
But you know what? Sometimes it's also helpful to be in it, to come and be in it, because what's actually happening is they're racing ahead or they're stuck in the past.
Yes. You're touching on all the goodies. Let's go to the next thing. So granted you understand that, there's letting go and mindfulness. This is already next level. Mm-hmm. Right? What I just explained was a physical trick. I've found that adrenaline is stronger, so you could do adrenaline-based activities.
Okay, right.
Now,
well, that also touched in the sensory that I told you earlier. So sometimes people will take a bath to calm them down.
right. I was going to get to that
Or
also.
shower.
Yeah.
Listen to music.
That's really interesting because
That's a sense.
there's reasons
The
for
five
that.
senses: hearing, smelling, touching.
So letting go is mental.
Right.
If you're bugging out, let's say let's say abnormal heart rate bugs you out. Whatever it is that's bugging you out, you're having a panic attack. You're about to have a panic attack. Something's triggering you. These take years to master, but learn to let go. So I'll give you an example. I would have heart palpitations. Many people do. It's normal. My heart palpitation would cause me to freak out that I'm going to have a heart attack or I'm dying or something's happening.
Right. So you want to do something.
So then next thing you know, I have bad anxiety attack because I had a heart palpitation.
Right.
I learned, and this is partially because I got more comfortable with the idea of death, but I've learned I don't care. And it works two ways. You ask yourself, what's going to happen? Okay, I'm going to have a heart attack. I don't care. I'm going to die. I don't care.
I don't know if it's I don't care or it's at least I know these are the two things and I know what I'm facing. So that's the worst case scenario.
Yeah,
Okay?
meaning
So it can't be worse than that.
that's what I'm saying. When you get to the level of
But you know
it
what that
doesn't
is? It's
matter
not I
if I
don't care.
die.
It's awareness. Awareness helps us come to acceptance. Acceptance helps us let go.
well, whatever the terminology they use, whether I accept, maybe you could say I accept, but the point is it's the same phenomenon.
Correct.
It's kicking in and you're accepting it, or you don't care if it happens.
Right.
It's like when you fly or you're going to jump out of a plane. What's if the parachute doesn't pull? I don't care. I'm ready. I accept.
I accept.
So maybe I accept is a better term for it, but this is
Basically,
a real
when
method.
you're giving your brain the facts, your brain can calm down.
Right. because it's
It's not running wild.
Now, a lot of people say, no, I do care. I don't want to have a heart attack.
Of course you don't. Nobody wants to.
But this is part of the process. Like, you literally have to go through these functions to gain mental faculties in order to deal with these things.
Well, that's why I said it's not I don't care. But at least I know what I'm facing.
Right.
This is the worst case
When
scenario.
I say I don't care,
I'm
I'm going to an even deeper level. It doesn't matter. Why doesn't it matter?
Anymore. Right.
Because after 1 minute, you'll be dead. Now, you go to the next world if you believe in that, or if you don't, it doesn't matter either way, because it's going to pass within a minute, and you'll either be dead or not. More likely, you won't be.
But that also comes back to comfortability with death.
That's what I said. It ties directly into the idea of getting comfortable with dying.
Right.
So maybe you have to go through the worst fear of your life, falling in that airplane, for a couple minutes or a minute, but then it'll be over.
Yeah.
If you get comfortable with the fact that you may have to go through some trauma, and you accept it and you don't care, and this is a real method. This is a real practice that you have to do. There are different areas. There's the physical, like we said, but these are mental stuff. When it starts kicking in, there's a level of letting go.
Strengthening. There's a lot of.
So I did that with heart palpitations, for example. Now, if I have a heart palpitation, I just ignore it, and it doesn't trigger anything anymore.
I've said this so many times to people. Like, I could be having active anxiety. My heart rate's irregular. I'm having a hard time concentrating, but I could do my regular daily functions. And because I work through them, because I continue with my day as usual, it's gotten so much less. Yeah. And it's not that I'm denying that it's there. I'm completely aware that it's there, but I'm allowing it to be there instead of fighting it. That's the big difference.
It's a bunch of misplaced puzzle pieces, and when you put them into place, they're all there. They're just in place.
Right.
Another example, I told you that the weed would build up a social anxiety. Mm-hmm. So I would start building up these issues. This is when I was a little bit younger, going into, let's say, simchas and events. And what did I do? Again, I didn't let it. I know I have friends who don't socialize. They built up these kinds of social anxieties. They do not socialize. These are real. This is real life implications.
Yeah.
I never allowed it. So what I would do is I would fight it. Now there's this method of fighting it like head on, which you don't necessarily have to do. For example,
if you come in and be loud.
Exactly. If I was going into a wedding hall, instead of slipping in the back door, in order to fight it, I would walk straight into the middle, go straight to the bride or groom and say Mazel Tov. And now in my mind, this was this whole battle, and I became center of attention, and this is horrible.
Right.
But I had to fight it in this gruesome way. Yeah. in order to
it was like all or none.
Right. In order to be okay with just being a normal person and attending.
So you don't have to do that.
You don't have to, but it is another method. My point is, there's this idea of fighting it head on. Another person wouldn't go. I never allowed myself to do that. You could
walk in, say hi to a couple people that, kind of warm up, and then make your way into the center.
Right. No, doing that is also, it's a flaw in the thought process of a person who has anxiety.
Right.
A person who is socially anxious is probably because they're socially awkward also, or they think they're socially awkward, and they create awkwardness because of their own thoughts. You don't have to do the head-on thing. You could come in like a normal person, and despite the fact that you think you come across as weird or socially weird, you don't. And just be a normal person. Come in, say hi, sit down. You don't have to talk. You don't have to become center of attention. Right. You don't. These are different approaches for different people, but you don't have to.
But you know what else also? Sometimes you're overcompensating for that uncomfortableness by being overly
That's what I'm saying.
Loud.
The idea of walking in to being so bold is
overcompensating.
It's like a fluke in the mind of a person who's anxious, because they think they're going to solve their issue by being dumb. By being
it's not
bold.
dumb, but being bold.
Yeah, they're going to be
being
bold.
Out there, or
Very interesting. Anyone could have anxiety. We have a very flamboyant family. And from an outsider's perspective, they could think, well, they're so confident maybe articulate and different things, but never confuse somebody who has some of the biggest people, biggest speakers deal with hardcore anxiety.
Biggest personalities.
Yeah. never confuse it to anyone could have
Absolutely.
anxiety, and in fact everybody does in different areas. The biggest, toughest guy might have anxiety when it comes to expressing himself to his spouse.
So true.
Everybody has anxiety, it's a matter of identifying it and not and dealing with it.
Understanding how it's expressing itself.
A lot of people don't even know where they have anxiety because they avoid it so well. For example, if you grow up and your family is anxiety prone because it's in your DNA. Let's say 8 of the 11 siblings know that they have anxiety. They're aware of it, and they're not shy about it. So maybe they work on it or they don't. But the other 3, for example, let's say they may get anxious in a social setting. But they've built up such big walls. They've never gone to social setting, but they don't think of it in terms of anxiety. They just think of it in terms of preference. Like, I don't do those things.
Right,
but really, it's because you never acknowledged and faced your anxiety. So in every person, there's anxiety and there's areas of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to find, because that makes you a normal, social, likable person.
Well, understand why you do things the way you do things. Because many times you're doing it because, what I said earlier, you're almost lying to yourself. Or you're not aware. You're not lying intentionally.
Well, that's the idea.
But you're not aware of why you're acting the way you're acting.
Socializing is a normal, healthy thing that humans do.
Right.
If you say you don't like socializing because really you feel anxious and socially awkward when you're there, but you don't admit that, that means you have an anxiety that's crippling you in a certain area of life and potential. So, that's really important. Regarding some other tricks, you mentioned bath. Okay, so back to some physical stuff. I said adrenaline.
It's
major trick.
The 5 senses.
Okay, so I've found hot baths to work well if I was panicking. And when I say hot, I mean scorching.
Some people do cold, by the way.
It triggers different types of senses, but it's a similar type of... Okay, so what I found... Okay, now, baths. Why do baths work? Hugs. They make weighted blankets that weigh a little bit more. I think it's rooted possibly in the idea of being in a mother's womb, where you're protected, warm, and contained. Mm-hmm. It may be rooted in that. They're not 100% sure, but physical touch, a hug, being hugged or cuddling in a blanket, being in very hot water, which feels like there's a couple parts to it I've realized in the hot water, mm-hmm. which I haven't done in a long time, which is an indication that I haven't had that kind of anxiety or panic in a long time, very long time, which is cool to think about right now. But hot water does a couple things. First of all, it burns your skin, so it takes the thought where you're, because you're panicking, right, and you're in this mole of thinking about, and it distracts it by the burn.
Well, you know why? Because often when you're in an emotional state, you're feeling it physically.
Oh, for sure.
You're sensing it physically.
Which brings me to this. This ties into another concept. Why warm?
So
I never heard of people who have anxiety going into cold, but I could tell you about warm.
So when you change what you're feeling physically, it could actually change your thoughts also. So you're getting into this hot bath. Your skin is sensing something else.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things happening. First of all, it's distracting you because if it's abnormal temperature, if it's cold or hot, first it's distracting you.
How hot are you talking?
We're talking hot. I do it hotter than a hot tub. I do it so hot that it takes me like 30 seconds to a minute or two to get fully in it. It burns.
I don't do it that hot.
Only when I'm having a panic attack and I want to bring...
It helps you.
So first of all, it's distracting. So it's right away taking your mind, oh, wow, this is hot. You're putting your foot in it. It's almost like distracting yourself with push-ups. Right. It's a distraction.
It's breaking the cycle.
So it's breaking the cycle of your thoughts.
Right.
But your heart rate might still be anxious. So you're stepping into boiling hot water. First, it's distracting you. Second, it feels comforting because the water is almost hugging you. Right. The hot water, you feel that embrace of it. So there's three concepts there alone. I've noticed a strong correlation between cold and anxiety. Think about this. What happens when you're anxious? Your heart, your chest area gets fluttery. And that's also panic, and that's hyperventilating. When somebody
Your
says,
fingers might get
and
cold.
you start, and it's your heart.
It's not pumping the blood properly.
Right.
So then your fingers get cold.
That happens when you have anxiety. That also happens when you get cold.
Yeah.
When you get really cold, your heart rate starts getting, it can't catch its breath, right? There's an interesting correlation there. If it shows, it's almost like your mind triggers your anxiety to do the same thing as what happens when you're cold.
So that's why cold wouldn't work. I don't think it would.
I don't know if cold.
I had never heard of cold until one person told me.
That they go into a cold bath
They go into a
when
cold
they're
shower.
anxious.
When they wanted when they want to break the cycle of ruminating, overthinking.
Oh, that for sure, because of sensory.
Yeah.
So the thought of it being so cold will take you off your thoughts from other things. That makes sense.
But this is more anxiety.
With the heart here.
Yeah.
Your heart gets fluttery when you're physically cold, when you're in snow.
Right.
And when you start getting uncomfortable, you build up, but your mind doesn't tell you that you're anxious in that sense. But when you have anxiety, your heart feels almost the same way.
Mm-hmm.
When you give it warmth and comfort, it settles it back down. So that's very interesting. I've also noticed that, when I've gotten cold, it's almost like anxiety.
Yeah.
You want to go back to warmth,
You're tensed
comfort.
up. You're
It's the same type of symptoms.
symptoms. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. There's this correlation between cold, the way that you react physically when you're cold, and the way that you react physically when you're anxious, and how warmth and comfort and hugs and embracement helps that. Very, very interesting.
So true.
Then there are mental and meditative, mindful ways, therapeutic ways to deal with anxiety. I've literally done all of these things. I'm not putting this out as multiple choice. Let me choose two. If somebody's dealing with hardcore anxiety, you need to change your life and literally do all of these things if you want to get it under control.
So I'm going to say more. Something like meditation is always brought up onto the table. And I had a very hard time doing it until very recently. So it's possible that when you're in a panic zone or at the beginning of healing, you won't be able to quiet your mind and come into the moment. It's practice. Practice. So it took me a couple of years to finally be in a place where now I could turn on a meditation, and I actually usually fall asleep, which is good because that means I'm in the moment. I'm really just in it, breathing it, feeling it.
What did you have a hard time with? Was it being alone with your thoughts, or being calm enough?
When I would try to quiet my mind, or when you quiet your mind because you're doing meditation, so you're just sitting and it's quiet, the thoughts would start flooding. And I heard another doctor talking about that, and she said it doesn't always work for people with high anxiety. So actually trying to meditate when you're in an episode might not work, and that's okay.
Yeah, I haven't found that meditation is something that you use while you're panicking.
Right. So meditation helps as a practice to do when you're not.
Yeah, because it teaches you mindfulness,
right?
Control of thought. Not when you're anxious. No, you don't do that when you're anxious. When you're anxious, you could do the physical stuff.
Correct.
And you could do some of the mental stuff like accepting.
Through meditation, you learn what it means to be in the moment. You learn what it is to listen to your breathing. When you listen to your breathing, you're in this moment. And then your thoughts wander away, and then you just bring it back to focusing on your breathing. So it's really great. But I think I want people to know that it took me time, because I think that we expect ourselves to just use it and just have it available right away. And I know for me it took time to build that.
No, it takes so much time.
Yeah.
Anyone who has serious anxiety has to acknowledge and think of it and see it as just a lifelong thing that they're always going to deal with on a certain level. It's
It gets
part
better
of who
though.
you
It's
are.
part of who you are. It gets a lot better though. So
Yeah,
again,
well, you're going to conquer one, you're going to have it in another area.
true, but does the intent, like you said
The
before, the
intensity,
intensity
no.
goes away?
No. It's been years since I had a panic attack.
That's what I'm saying.
100% you're gonna get the nastiness of it under control
Yeah.
if you work on it.
Yeah.
And mind you, I do all the things that would have triggered it in the past.
Right.
So no, I'm not getting panic attacks. But like I said, rock climbing, I'm so anxious that I can't even open my fingers.
You'll practice it enough, and you'll get used to it. You'll
Even
teach your DNA to be okay
right.
with it. You'll teach your brain that this process is safe. It's okay.
Mindfulness.
That's why I've been taking Yaakov for ice skating. You know, he had broken his leg rollerblading in the summer. He has an intense fear of, you know, getting back into skates. And I've been taking him ice skating. And he's still terrified. And I know it's just something that's going to take years for him to...
Yaakov, your son, how old is he?
He is 11.
That brings me back to a thought that I wanted to share earlier. Matanel, my son, who is 5, when we're talking about DNA and how it runs in blood, it is so innate, it is so there, that I see it in my son, and I saw it right away. As soon as I was able to gauge any human behavior in a baby and a toddler, I was able to see his shyness and social awkwardness. Now he's 5, it's apparent. If I walk in anywhere into any kind of social setting, he's hiding, he's grabbing my legs, hiding behind me, right? 20, 30 minutes, he gets comfortable, then he's sent their attention. But that's not from nurture. I had my social anxiety under control from before he was born. I never shied away from socializing. I have a lot of friends. So there's no nurture part of that. He didn't see that in me. It's in the DNA.
Yeah.
He was shy literally from when you could see at 1, 2 years old. Whatever kind of early indications you could possibly see in your kid, and a parent could see it pretty early on, it's there. And this is what it means, that it's literally in your DNA. You're either a shy and anxious type of person.
And that's part of your personality, and then you work with it.
And there's nothing, I don't know how to like properly express it. Not only is there nothing wrong with it, it's beautiful if you get to the level of education of understanding how beautiful it is, because it's who you are. It's what makes you you. It's
what makes you so unique. It's
part
of what makes you you.
If you properly develop it,
you could use it in a very good way.
Meaning, if you're the person that, there's 2 options. If you're the person that has anxiety
It
hides from it,
empathy and understanding to other people, because you know how to feel so intensely.
That's one of a trillion benefits. Yeah. If you're the type of person that has anxiety and you shy away from it, and you build up walls and phobias, and you don't do things because of it, then it's a lot of wasted potential. You didn't live your life to your fullest. If you face it head on, meaning you're developing your anxiety into good attributes and great things, then it is literally the manifestation of your soul and potential.
For sure.
Meaning, you looking in retrospect, if you live that way, you could say that you lived your life in the way that it was kind of meant to be, or in the potential that it could have been. But if you don't, then you can't say that, because it's like this ultimate expression.
Because working through it is your growth. Working through it is what creates you and makes you.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's hard to
explain.
It's so deep.
It's so many levels.
It's a very deep concept that not only it's not bad, it'll make you the ultimate you.
Yeah.
That character development, if you could work to express and get your anxiety under control, will be the ultimate manifestation and display of your soul, your being, your personality.
Ultimate potential.
Really, really amazing. There's another thing that I wanted to mention. So many things that I'm forgetting, and it's just coming back to me. It's don't overthink is another trick. Don't overthink things.
It's so easy to say that.
I say it and I overthink a million things, but it's still a tool that could and needs to be used. If you want to do something, if you want to go somewhere, if you want to be something, anxiety is the worst when you think too much, right? We know the more you think about something, the bigger the chances are that you won't do it, not the other way around.
But a little bit of anxiety could give you the adrenaline to do well also. So it's not always bad.
In healthy real life scenario, if you're a volleyball player, you need to be anxious before a game to do well and to kick ass. But in the sense that you shouldn't overthink it going into it, that will get you to do things. It could be the most mundane thing. If you want to go to gym now, if you overthink it,
you're not going to want to
go.
The
likelihood, it's more than a 50% chance that you won't go. If you thought gym and you jumped in the car a minute later, you are going to go.
Yeah.
So there's this aspect of overthinking, and people who have anxiety overthink and shy away. I'll give you a story. Not a story, but a real life scenario. So for the past year or two, I've been watching arm wrestling videos on YouTube. I think it's a fascinating sport. It's a small sport. It's up and coming. It's growing. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but it's growing. You know, it's becoming a real national, international, whatever. There aren't any clubs near where we live. If there was, I would probably stop by, check it out. There aren't any clubs. It's real underground. Like, there's no real website. There's no, just to figure out where to go practice, right, where to do it with people. You know, your friends are not. My friends don't want to arm wrestle with me. I want to freaking arm wrestle.
Right.
So I did the research. Somehow I get on this mailing list, and I get these emails that there's practice in Brooklyn or Queens every week. So every couple of weeks I get this email, practice tonight. Now, because it's not local, now think about this. So I get these emails. I ignore them on such a subconscious level. Why? Because deep down, I'm not the person that just thinks and does. In fact, I'm the opposite. I'm programmed like an anxious person. This is weird. A practice in Queens, people I don't know, in a new sport I've never done.
I'm going to drive an hour.
I'm going to go
over bridges for this.
Now, obviously, I'm not thinking all this stuff.
Right.
Consciously, but subconsciously, all of that is there.
Subconsciously, it's there, but what's coming up? An uncomfortable feeling. I want to go? No.
Right.
Behind
no. I don't even do that. I completely
no.
ignore that. Like, it just means nothing to me, the email.
Exactly.
I'm so subconsciously denying it. This is how people are programmed that are anxious. And this is what we said before. It holds you back from life.
So again, that's where we come back to awareness. When you're saying a no, when you suddenly realize that you're having that uncomfortable feeling, asking yourself, why?
Yeah. This is a mental process that takes years and years of awareness. Just yesterday, the email comes in again. So this is what I mean by don't overthink. You're into something because this will actualize your potential.
Right.
You're into something, just go do it without thinking.
Right.
Your husband or somebody you know, maybe they're watching baseball all day. They love baseball or football. But they block themselves from the thought of going here locally and joining a little group of guys that are playing amateurs, Why? Because of what I just explained. Right. You're not even allowing yourself to even think in such terms because you're programmed like an anxious person. You're so deeply and subconsciously blocking it out. Me on a baseball field throwing up, I watch on YouTube.
So the truth is that we do avoidance behavior. We all do avoidance behaviors to some degree.
We do it in life in general, but the anxious person has it so deeply rooted that they don't even think like a healthy person thinks, oh, that's cool. I want to go for dance lessons. A day later, they had dance lessons.
Right.
The anxiety person says, I have such a passion for dance for 10 years. Never went once. Right. So
Sounds familiar.
yesterday I got the email and I'm thinking about it. I messaged my friend, "Hey, you want to go?" He didn't feel like driving to the Queens. And I'm thinking back and forth, and I know all these things. Let me not think about it too much. I want to check it out. There's some questions I want to answer. Like, I want to see if I like it.
So did you go?
I went.
Nice.
I drove down to Queens, and it was all the guy dungeon, stinky, smelly guys who don't use deodorant, and you're arm wrestling, and I did it for the first time in my life.
No,
and,
how was it?
and it was fun, and
That's so cool.
and I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll come back. Like
So many times it's fear of the unknown. I've never been here. I've never done this. I don't know these people. But you do it once and you see that it's nothing. It's not a big deal.
Right. And all these anxieties that you build up before it, they disappear in a second.
Yeah.
Anxious person thinks of all these things. First of all, you have to meet people. Second of all, you have to try something. Maybe you're going to have to, if it's a sport related thing, maybe you're going to lose. And then there's all these thoughts of unanswered questions. Like, will I be good at it? Do I suck? Do I know what I'm doing?
Right.
Right. If you just learn how to not think so much, just go do. Guess what? I did it, and all those things, and all those things that I might have thought before, I'm never going to think again because it's a past.
It's irrelevant.
Right. This is how people with anxiety need to approach things.
But
you're
this
interested
also comes
in something.
back to learning to be in the moment. You make a decision, you follow through with it, be in the moment with it. Now I'm just driving. Now I'm here. Now I'm talking to this guy. Suddenly there's no anxiety. You're just living it as it's happening.
Well, that's the concept that you explained earlier, that your anxiety people are always thinking about what's going to be, something they're worried about, or what was. They're letting what was trigger them, and they're thinking about what's going to be, how things are going to mess up, what they're afraid of, what's going to happen.
Yep.
They're always there, or they're not here. They're not here and now. So one of these practices is just learning how to dial it down. You have a thought, you have a passion for something, go. This is what I mean by the development of it will help you actualize into because you're so aware as an anxious person of things.
Right.
And as you get into this journey of working and healing, you end up, as it is, a person who has anxiety is usually more aware than a person who doesn't on a certain level. Because there's a direct correlation between awareness and anxiousness.
Yes.
Anxious people are usually aware of more anomalies and just stupid little things, that's
and
why
they're
they're anxious.
Right.
So there's a direct connection.
Right.
If you're more aware, you're more prone to get anxious about things because you're aware of things that you shouldn't be aware of.
Right.
Which we've learned that you should, because that's you. That's your guide. That's your guiding light. That's what's going to help actualize your potential.
Right.
What was my point? If we learn to focus on the things that we really want and forget about all the pointless thoughts, then this is a practice basically that will help us achieve things, achieve our potential. Mm-hmm. Now, I had some other thoughts that just popped in that I wanted to mention. Adult coloring books, for example. These types of things, arts and crafts, very tedious, little fine things that you do with your hands. It helps take your mind off. So these are one of these things that you could do. It's kind of like meditation. You're just sitting at a table, maybe some calm background music. You're doing, let's say, a adult coloring book, or you're doing little arts and crafts. This does a couple things, but one of the things that it does is that it distracts you. It's mindfulness. It's teaching you subconsciously how to live with your thoughts and yourself, and it gets you comfortable with it. And the fact is, when you do these practices, all of them combined for years, you become comfortable with it. So essentially, that is what you're trying to do. You can't outsmart anxious thoughts. Your brain is smarter than you, so when you're trying to outsmart it, it'll always outsmart you. You're just basically outsmarting yourself. It's a vicious cycle. The person who has anxiety, or who thinks about his anxiety, or tries to solve his anxiety, just continues to get it in these loops. Because
they're focusing on it.
There's only one way, and that's completely to focus on something else. And then doing things where you're not only focusing on something else, but also having to live with your own thoughts. With a progression and time, you will get comfortable with it. Right. You'll find yourself at 25, if your anxiety started at 15, that you're comfortable with your stupid thoughts. They don't scare you anymore. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I haven't panicked in years. Nothing has triggered it because all the stuff that did trigger it, I got under control. Now, that doesn't mean that something might not turn up in the future that might trigger it, but I'll deal with it as it comes.
You become more confident in the ability to experience it.
Only if you work on it, because we know people where it just gets worse and worse. Phobias build. People don't drive cars, don't drive anywhere, don't go anywhere.
Well, based on what you just said, like after a couple years, and if it pops up in a different area, But had you worked on it before, you build a confidence that you'll get through it.
If you're that person that works on it, there's this level of first of all, you're actually achieving things. You're getting over things, and things that used to trigger you don't anymore. So you're actually progressing.
Right, exactly.
And then, when new stuff comes up, it doesn't throw you off. It's like, okay, I know how to deal with this, and there's going to be an approach and a system to it.
Right.
So that's like adult coloring books or arts and crafts and those kinds of things.
Well,
also,
it's again mindful, and I did use coloring books as a way of meditating.
Yeah, I still use them.
Yeah. I haven't used mine in a while.
A couple times a week. A couple times a week. I also stretch. Puzzles, really fine puzzles. Stretching. I do yoga or stretching. With some calm music. I dim the lights. Just all these things that are mindful. It teaches you a personal prayer. In spirituality, it's all the same thing. Yeah. Being with yourself, processing yourself, your own thoughts, there's a different level. Personal prayer is you're expressing yourself. That's very a high level of meditation.
Right.
But these other stuff is where you're quiet. You're not talking. You're just processing.
You're being in it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Taking walks, also very healthy and very important, which brings me to cardio and working out. Cardio is a very, very important thing. So if you're young and you have anxiety and you're new to anxiety, you're trying to deal with anxiety, sign up to gym. You have to be in gym. Lift weights, do cardio, specifically cardio, because there's a direct connection, as we discussed in the beginning of the podcast, your heart and your heart rate with how your mind. Because essentially the fear, let's just put it this way. All these last points that I want to make come together. If your heart rate doesn't go up, you're not bugging out. You're not just bugging out from thought, but your heart is completely calm. The fear is in your heart. How do I know? First of all, what do they give people when they have anxiety? Drugs. We don't know how to deal with it yet, so they give you drugs. What's the drugs do? It's stimulation, because it's serotonin and certain other things, but the serotonin or whatnot, whatever chemicals, is not allowing your heart rate to go up.
Right. It's a relaxant.
Or if your heart rate does go up, the serotonin is stronger, so it makes you feel good, so it doesn't bug you out.
Right.
I had a hernia surgery a couple years ago, and I was getting anxious. The thought of being put to sleep bugged me out. I've never had a surgery, right? So I'm freaking out.
I feel like I'd be that way.
For sure. Like the first time, so I'm thinking there, like I'm just getting anxious. So much thought. Yeah. So much thought beforehand.
Building it up. Right.
Right. For weeks and months, you already know you're going to do it. So you're thinking, okay, how am I going to react? And now you're already in it. You're there. You're on the table. Blah blah blah. So, and it was getting a little bad, like getting a little, flustered and hard to breathe. So I tell the nurse or the doctor, I'm bugging out. So he shot me up with some drugs. And you feel it right away. These are hardcore stuff, right? Whatever it was. Within 10 seconds, you feel it rushing through your blood, and it gets to your heart, and your heart calms down. Now, I may have felt good, but that wasn't the highlight. The highlight, because I'm so in tune, was that I'm bugging out. My heart rate's up. I don't feel comfortable. I feel afraid. My heart rate, whatever this did, my heart rate right away dropped. And if my heart is calm, I'm calm. I go into the surgery room with a smile.
Right.
They ask me how I'm doing. I show them a thumbs up with a smile. I don't even have to talk. I'm good.
Right.
Lights out.
Yeah.
And then they put you to sleep, and you have a smile on your face.
But that brings us to drugs.
A calm heart. You're right. Well, it all ties together.
Because I'll have people telling me, so many times.
But before we go to the drugs, the calm heart is what solves the issue. So when you do cardio and you do weightlifting, you're using up your energy. This is what happens. When you're at home at night, a couple hours after a hardcore cardio workout where your heart was racing, your heart is calmer than it was before you went to the gym.
Yes, that's true.
A calm heart equals less anxiety. If you have anxiety, you have to work out and do hardcore cardio and weightlifting. You'll deplete yourself physically, which will help you sleep better at night and give you a calm heart.
Your resting heart rate will be lower if you do exercise.
You're physically calmer. Yeah. If your heart is calmer, you're getting less anxious because anxiety ties into the heart.
Right.
Now back to the drugs.
Yeah.
Right. I gave an example. The drugs calm me down. Now the drugs. Yeah. Drugs is what is given and prescribed to people who have anxiety because we don't have a real way to deal with this phenomenon. But I'll let you explain. I don't think drugs doesn't solve the issue.
Drugs definitely don't solve the issue. And it bothers me when people tell me they're taking drugs.
For anxiety.
For anxiety.
It covers it up.
It covers it up.
Drug for all mental illness or most mental illness is a cover-up and a way to cope, but It's not dealing with it.
It's not the solution.
It's definitely
But what happens is it numbs it, so then you're not either dealing with it.
Right.
So then you never get an opportunity to get off it unless you're willing to go back to that the uncomfortable feelings of sitting through it and working through it.
You got to go through the scrub rush at some point or another.
Oh yeah. There's no easy way out.
It's like
but then when you're cured, when it's cured, you're fully cured through and through.
Well, that one point is very important. Like in Breslov, like there's this idea. I mean, all of Judaism or Hasidus, if you don't cleanse yourself in this world or go through some of these hardships, Bobby also shared that with me. It's detoxing. You have to go through the pain of a detox, or with anxiety, go through the years of
the pain of it,
of fighting it and dealing with it, of facing it,
in order to come out the other side. 100%.
You're gonna go through the pain one way or another.
Exactly.
Really amazing, but drugs don't work, and it certainly
it gives a temporary relief. But it's not a cure.
It's a cover-up.
It's a cover-up.
It's a short-term remedy to make you feel calm right now.
Right.
But it doesn't... One thing it doesn't do, and this is like the biggest thing, because from a spiritual perspective, you want to live your life to the fullest. We talked about how these characters, these people with anxiety, if they develop it and it'll blossom into the perfect version of them, it is impossible for that to happen if you deal with anxiety with drugs. Drugs is a cover-up. Right. You'll never deal with it. You'll never get to that stage, to that level of connection, the self-expression of you, the blossom that you are, the potential that you are.
Right.
So
the fullest version, your best version of yourself.
That is only possible if you face and deal with anxiety head on. And I must say, for somebody that's been dealing with anxiety for years, and I'm sure you'll agree that it's worth it. It's possible and it's worth it.
Both.
I know
100%.
that 100%. I know 100% that I can get bogged down and build up phobias like this.
Yeah.
With a blink of an eye. You watch the wrong thing, think the wrong thing. But I don't allow myself.
Well, you don't allow yourself to get stuck by it.
I do everything in my power not to allow myself to go there. I know the benefits of working on it, and I know I could record for 2 hours just how difficult it is. I sympathize. I know the pain, the struggle. I know all those thoughts when you think that it's stronger than your own brain and it's outsmarting you, and it's even the healing process scares you, and the thought of...
Well, the healing process is scary because it's uncomfortable at times. It's learning to really sit it out.
When you have panic, when you are scared, everything, any thought you think to even try to help yourself, that thought itself scares you.
Yeah.
There's very, very, very low level anxiety, not low level, fundamental level of anxiety, which is just the utter fear and anxiousness of existence, and nothing makes sense to you. What are we? What are we doing here? How is all of this possible? Right? These are things that you can never solve, but these are things that you could get comfortable with.
Right.
I literally had anxiety and deep philosophical, unanswerable thoughts that led to anxiety. Now, I said my anxiety started when I was 15. That was the first time I had like a panic attack. But I remember fifth grade, fourth grade, certain grades, thinking very philosophical thoughts like, how is any of this possible?
Mm-hmm.
Or stuff that you should really only think when you're really older on such a deep level. I would quickly avoid it, run away because those are a scary thought. Now,
Yeah.
this is just in retrospect. I just remember these couple times when I have these types of thoughts.
Right.
How is any of this possible? But ultimately, this, as I got older, that led to real anxiety. And when you have anxiety and have those kinds of thoughts, oh no, it's destructive. And those are like the most disgusting levels of anxiety. Like, you don't feel comfortable in your skin.
Right. Right.
But, and I could go on and on about that, about working on it endlessly and tirelessly, year after year after year, you'll get comfortable in your skin, you'll get comfortable in your expressions and your socializing and basically all of that stuff. So hopefully some of these tips and tricks could help you. It was an utter pleasure. I feel grateful to be able to express all of this and have a conversation about it. So thank you for joining me. I know
Sure.
that a dialogue will help
Well,
bring
I'm
it out much better.
yeah, I'm a peer support specialist, and that's really what it is.
Yeah,
It's
congratulations
sharing.
on
Yeah, thank you.
passing all of that.
Well, it's basically sharing a lived experience. And so, what people need to know is you're not alone. You're
No.
not crazy for experiencing this, and you're definitely just, again, not alone. Like, we're two people talking about how we
Yeah.
experience it and how we work on it and deal with it. So it's very, very common.
It's the
thing.
ultimate triumph years in, when you've conquered most of it, at least the tough ones, the panic, that you get all that under control, to say, to be here, to express it, to talk to others about it, and potentially help them, get through it. Really amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Until
Let's do
next
this
time.
again.
Yes. God bless. Here's a little tidbit that I'm recording on my way home, because I was thinking about what we spoke, what we discussed, and of course, needless to say, I forgot a million of my points, because I've been wanting to share on the topic of anxiety for a couple of years now. And when I was younger and more involved with the journey, just as I recently recorded A Breath of Fresh Outlook, which is me expressing a lot of what I'm going through or how I'm processing things in business, but I'm closely related to those times. It's the same thing with anxiety. As I work on it, get it under control, I, in a certain sense, depart from it. I have less of a relationship, less of a connection with it. Because like I said, I don't get panic attacks. Now, it's not to say that I can't get one. I just haven't got one in years, because I've gotten my anxiety so much under control. So naturally, I've forgotten a lot of what I wanted to share, but leaving Gneshe and thinking about some of what we discussed sparked my memory about how I used to conceptualize this whole phenomenon. And I just wanted to throw it out there. I had conceptualized anxiety as what you put in. Your input determines your output. And what are the various ways in which a human has input? By what we eat, what we listen to, what we see, and of course, what we smell, and what we feel. As Gneshe touched on a little bit, it's the five senses. And if you want somewhat of a framework to deal with your anxiety, this is a certain type of framework that you could use that is perhaps more structured than all of the points that we just threw out there. Your input determines your output. What you take in will determine what you feel outwardly, what you will express outwardly. And in that sense, it's a couple things that we didn't emphasize. For example, we talked about caffeine, sugar as triggers for us. I should have mentioned it as a point. If you have anxiety, stay away from sugar and caffeine. I can't explain to you how much of an effect that has. The stuff you eat has a very, very strong and direct correlation to your anxiety. People who are prone to get anxiety will get triggered from caffeine, because caffeine raises your heart rate. Sugar makes you anxious like crazy. And there are other foods. I had it down to a science at some point. I was so in tune with what I was eating. I knew exactly how each thing made me feel. Dairy made me feel a certain way. Eating meat makes me feel a certain way. Now, food makes everyone feel a certain way. Different foods make people feel different things. People with anxiety are just more in touch. Now, they may not make these connections, and that's why I'm sharing this, but it's a fact that we feel a certain way after we eat something. Protein gives you energy, you know. Drinking a tea calms you down. Tea, I drink a lot of tea. Caffeine-free tea. Put some honey. Learn to eat, drink, calm things. Things that don't have sugar. Things that don't stimulate you. You're a very stimulated person if you're anxious. Everything stimulates you. All the senses. What you eat, what you see, what you drink, what you hear. So, in terms of eating, what you put into your mouth, the input of what you put into your mouth, let it be healthier, calmer, no sugar, no caffeine type of food. That you will see 100% direct correlation. You'll see it quickly. Another trick that people often say is to make a little bit of a journal. Keep track of it. This is all for people who want to get their anxiety under control. Don't give up. It's so easy to get those feelings, because I know how long anxiety lingers. As we've said, it's your entire life. It's who you are. You're that type of person. So at a certain point, you could almost get comfortable with, you know what? I'm not fighting it anymore. This is who I am. I'm going to accept that I don't do this, and this, and I give in to my fears, and I'm just going to avoid, avoidance behavior we spoke about. I'm just going to avoid doing this and doing that. Don't do that. You can get past all of the big fears, all of the big triggers. You can figure all of it out. So obviously, this podcast, this episode, and all of what we've expressed and what we're expressing now, and what I'm saying now is just there for people who want to solve it, who don't want to live with it. It can be solved, but remember, it's years of hard work. So input, whatever you put in, is directly correlated to what you feel. What you feel is the output. That's the expression of you. So food, like I said, stay away from sugar and caffeine. Eat healthier. Drink calm things. Stop with the sodas and the syrups. When you find out and realize how much sugar you possibly or potentially consume a day, if you cut out the sugar for the most part, and caffeine, you'll see right away improvements, right away. With anxiety specifically. Don't take caffeine pills, none of that stuff. 5-hour energies, Red Bulls, it's all garbage. It's bad for the body. That's what we said. Anxiety is your body telling you you're doing something wrong. One of your 5 input senses is getting or receiving something wrong. You change the pattern. In other words, you change the behavior. When I talk about patterns, I'm talking about behaviors. I know I've mentioned the word patterns a lot in this episode perhaps, and in other ones. When I talk about changing patterns, it's my way of saying behavior. There are things that we do. There are patterns that we follow because we're human. Humans are creatures of habit, so we follow these patterns, which are nothing but behavior. So you change the behaviors. Now, what are some other senses? What are some other inputs? What we listen to. If you're anxiety prone, don't listen to nonsense and garbage and action and fearful things. Stop listening to the news. Stop watching horror movies or scary movies. Stop listening to doomsday conspiracies. Control what goes into your... Listen to calm stuff, calm music, positive stuff. People talking about positivity, life, faith, health, healing, spirit. Listen to good stuff. Movies. find a new genre. Listen to comedy. Watch romance. Everything you listen and see, they kind of go together. Change those habits, those patterns, change those behaviors. Find new places to be expressive and to live your life. And you'll see a direct correlation. Less radio, less news and media and social media and all that garbage equals less anxiety. Same thing with touch. So this is just a framework to kind of be with you as you ponder how you want to approach dealing with your fears and anxiousness and panic attacks. Just remember these couple principles. Anxiety is your body telling you that something's wrong, something has to change. Your input determines your output. So if the output is off, if you're panicking, if you're getting anxious, something you're putting in is incorrect. Maybe you need help. Maybe you need healing. Maybe you need education. Who knows? It's the guiding light. Hashem is guiding you. And essentially, in a tailor-made fashion. But you could only sense that and know that if you tune into the channel, if you get educated, if you have to become intuitive, soul-searching, thinking about it, being mindful, meditating, not escaping it. If you escape it, if you don't already know, it doesn't go away. You'll be 20, 30, 40, 50. You'll live with phobias. You won't live a life of expression and health and being out there. All because of stupid anomalies in the brain. You will have been outsmarted by your own brain instead of you taking control. Your desires, the expressions of your soul, your free will, the divine in you should be so much stronger. The will to get it under control should be so much stronger. And indeed, if you pursue it, it will overpower the stupidity or mechanics of your brain. But you need to have that will. You need to have that soul, that drive. I hope that most of what we shared, everything that we shared kind of covers most of what we have to share on the topic. I know a lot of these things took me years to figure out on my own, and they've helped me tremendously. Try them out. If you have any specific questions, if you have any specific fears, this was obviously very broad because, as you can see, I could slip into one kind of phobia, one kind of fear, and talk about it for an hour straight. I was trying to give a big. I know there's a million types of fears and a million types of anxieties, and people get anxious for all kinds of things. And to paint a broad picture like this could be a little confusing, but we were focusing more on the bedrock of behind what's behind all of it, without getting too detailed into the types. But if you have a certain type or something you struggle with specifically that wasn't covered, feel free to send us a message, comment, and we'll have a conversation about it. Also, this podcast is on, if you're listening on iTunes, it's on iTunes. It's on most platforms. If you leave some reviews or ratings, that will also help build it and improve the name. And you can share this with any friends or family who you think may benefit from it. Thank you for tuning in. Again, God bless you.